So c3 decides to open limp under the gun, raised by seat 4, fold, 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 fold. Here decides to 3-bet. Totally good so far. Fold, fold, call. So remember that. C3 decided to just limp call for 40 under the gun, and seat 4 folds. So here we are. Now, Tony left a very, very long write-up, but I'm just going to share 2 little snippets from it talking about seat 3 and their tendencies. So here's kind of the first bit, overarching idea about C3. Tony says, C3 is very loose passive preflop. He would check call his straight and flush draws postflop, and he overvalues top pair with rag kickers postflop. He's been running pretty well and up several hundred on the session, and Hero has played against him in the past and gotten him to fold some hands that he wouldn't have folded against other players in small to medium-sized pots. Okay, cool, all's well and good there. But Tony also goes on in a different part of the write-up to say this. To say C3 is obviously extremely loose, but Hero had previously in this session shown a huge laydown of a set against C3's made straight and has been playing extremely tight for the last six or so hours. And Hero knows that C3 knows that about him, right? That he's been playing really nitty this session, and the Hero over this session has largely shown up with overpairs and nutty hands at showdown. So all really, really good information to help us really figure out a precise line in this spot. So with all that being said, we can obviously assume that C3 is not just going to show up here with the nuts, and we'll keep that in mind as we go through. So going to the flop, we have a 10-9-3 rainbow board, check, Here decides to continuation bet, and in this situation I would just simply ask, like, what's your plan here, what do you think is going to happen? The more you think C3 is going to be check raising you, the less I'm in love with this, but if you think there's any folding by things like pocket 4s or like Ace-6 suited or anything like weird and junky like that, I can totally be on board with it. It just totally depends on your assumptions and also how aggressively they're going to play things like straight draws, pairs, gut shots with overs, that sort of thing. In this situation, we end up getting check min raised, and Hero decides to say, no, thank you, here's the 3-bet right back in your face. So let's start here. What do we think that C3 is going to min check raise with? Well, I don't think it's going to be a tremendous amount of air, right? Given the fact that this person is pretty loose and pretty passive, that's what makes me think that this could easily be something that's not very bluffy. So the question would be, like, if Hero decides to 3-bet, is C3 really going to be relinquishing like 10x, 9x, draws, any of that kind of stuff? And I don't think so. I think really all you're doing here is bloating the pot against hands that are going to get sticky. And remember, once they call here, the pot is ginormous going into the turn, and you're probably not going to have a tremendous amount of fold equity. Whereas, if you just decide to call the check raise, you're getting almost 5-1 immediate right this moment. You have position, you have backdoor draws, you have backdoor potential. This check raise size here shows me a bet sizing error, so I wouldn't be shocked if on the turn you face a bet of like 75 or 100, and you're able to get good odds there as well, and then you can really make some better decisions. So I love the fact that we're trying to be aggressive, but I don't think this is the spot where you can expect C3 is just going to say, yeah, I'd love to fold my pair, right? I mean, right there in the overall description you said, overvalues top pair with rag kickers post-flop. I mean, that alone tells me probably not the kind of dude I'm going to be able to get to shake 10x, 9x, or any of that kind of stuff. So I'd much rather just call the check min raise than 3-bet here when, again, I think there's very, very little fold equity and very, very little playability going forward. So again, just call the check raise and go forward. As played, Hero does 3-bet, C3 does call, so we will review the hand as played. And turn is a queen, there's a check by C3, and Hero decides to rip it in. So in the write-up, Tony says this: when the turn came and he checked to me, I thought I could credibly rep an overpair. Well, the thing about repping anything is that your opponent needs to be thinking about you and your range. If your opponent is only thinking about their own hole cards, it doesn't matter what you rep, because they're not thinking about what you rep, and thus they're just focused on, did my hand hit strong enough based upon whatever metrics I use for that, and if yes, then I continue, and if no, then I don't. It's usually pretty simple for someone who's thinking at that bare bones basic level. So this person, C3, is not someone who I think I need to rep anything. I think they're focused on their cards, they're focused on how they're hitting or missing, and they're going to make decisions solely based upon that. So because of that, when we get here and C3 checks the turn and we decide to rip, I ask myself, what hands is C3 going to relinquish here, right? Which hands did he get to the turn with that he now wants to fold? I don't think C3 folds 10x. I don't think C3 folds 9x. I don't think they fold Queen Jack. I think the only hand you get C3 to fold here is like 7-8. And that's probably roughly about it. Everything else either has pairs still or picked up extra equity or both of those things combined. So I don't think there's a large chunk of fold equity here. And this is just kind of one of the issues that I mentioned when we decided to 3-bet the flop in the first place, is that by the time you do that and get called, you have like no fold equity on future streets. And you just are kind of like limited, and essentially you have to like check the turn behind and hope to get a cheap river or hope to improve and that you can value bet somehow. You're pretty much just taking all the wind out of your own sails and limiting your options massively. And again, there's probably very, very minimal fold equity here. And that's really what's influencing the equation. So because of that, if I did ever get to the turn this way, I'd actually just check it behind. I don't think there's much fold equity, if any, here, and I think this is just a situation where I'm setting $400 on fire. So check it behind, take your free card, and go from there, rather than feel like you have to punt the rest of it in, and I'm going to be honest here, you're probably not going to be getting much of a return. So in this exact situation, C3 does end up calling, not shocking, and we end up losing to 10-9. And it just is what it is. Like, sure, he ends up showing up with 2 pair here, but I don't even think that if he shows up with like Ace-10 that he's going to be folding that. And just for the record, if you ever play this handout and you see this dude show up with 10-9 offsuit, mind you, he did limp call for 40 preflop. So this is a dude who's playing extremely loose passively preflop, and just keep that in mind when you're going forward. But again, I really don't particularly care for Hero's line here. The 3-bet on the flop I think was a little bit too wide, and then as played I think dumping the 400 on the turn is just a complete bury of money. But shy of that, I like preflop. I like, the overarching idea that you're trying to get aggressive, you're trying to think about, balanced plays and repping things. But again, know your audience. If C3 doesn't care what you rep, don't worry about it yourself. Just play really, really straightforward and value focused and find bluffing opportunities, but this was not a good bluffing opportunity given the range that would have gotten to the turn most likely.